Hello, welcome to this Holy Week, Wednesday, Pause for Thought. Of course, it's also in the time of the virus crisis and complete lockdown. Well, here in isolation, it's mighty difficult to get into Holy Week, a complete contrast with the Jerusalem we visited several years ago. Going through the city gate then, it was crowded, narrow streets and alleyways. People, tourists and locals, pushing and shoving. Beware of pickpockets, they said. There was the sweet odour of herbs and spices, and of course less pleasant smells as well. More different from where we lived in Norwich, you could not imagine. Light years away from the Norfolk country villages where we had spent so many years. We were simply gawping yokels, a bit overwhelmed, and I have to say, a bit uneasy. In the time of Jesus, it cannot have been much different. At the Passover festival, the city would have been more crowded than ever, with people from all over coming to visit. Yes, for religious reasons, but also because it was one gigantic party. St. John makes a very brief reference to some people who had come to the city for the festival. He calls them Greeks. They'd come to worship, so I suspect he means they were Jewish people who spoke Greek. If so, almost certainly they would have come from up north, from the villages around the northeast shore of the Sea of Galilee. Those villages were called the Decapolis, which is Greek for 10 towns. And many people there did indeed speak the language. Jesus himself was based not far away in Capernaum, and he went preaching in the Decapolis. Philip, one of the disciples, came from Bethsaida, which is even closer to the Decapolis, and indeed Philip is a Greek name. Well, my imagination gets going. I wonder if that small group of friends were just yokels like us, taking in the atmosphere but feeling a bit wary. And did they spy amongst the crowd someone perhaps dressed like them, whom they might have seen before, one of their own who speaks the same language? Jesus and his group of disciples would have had a reputation in the Decapolis, so maybe they'd been to one of his meetings. Or why not catch up among friends in this rather bewildering place? So they push over towards Philip and say, "We would like to see Jesus." Well, that's how I imagine it. We don't know if they ever did get to see him, but I love the idea of finding something, someone familiar in the midst of turmoil, and at a time when one is feeling out of place. You then know for certain in the crowd that you are not on your own. The awful thing is, if the news went around, they may have been tempted to go out to the execution hill to see Jesus, but not in the way that they had originally hoped. And I can imagine, as they went home, their acute sadness and disappointment at what happened in the holy city of Jerusalem, given, of course, all that it stood for. Home may be a poor place, a poor village up north, but it's best. What strikes me about this small snapshot is how personal it is. Amongst the anonymous throng, 3 personal names, Philip, Andrew and Jesus, are mentioned in just a couple of sentences in John's Gospel. And how meeting with Jesus depended on meeting, a chance meeting, another person. So when people say religion is a personal matter, what they seem to imply is that the crowd, the church, doesn't matter. But this little event tells us otherwise. If there was no crowd, our group of friends would not have met Philip, and the possibility of meeting Jesus would not have been there. So in this lonely Holy Week, I recall some famous words from the Epistle to the Hebrews. Seeing we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. We may be isolated, but there are good people around and we can keep going. Well, some people say our religion is caught, not taught. And in this spirit, my thoughts at this time, I'm remembering many individuals, people I was glad to meet over the years. In different ways, they have taken me personally to see Jesus. In Holy Week, I recall also how it is the person of Jesus who is lifted up above the crowd, isolated, so that we can all see him and see in him the very nature of God. And as if to emphasize how personal it is, Matthew and John add Jesus' own personal name to the sign of the cross. Not just the King of the Jews, but Jesus, King of the Jews. Well, as our Jewish friends say at the end of the Seder meal, next year in Jerusalem. Well, for us, next year, Holy Week, in church. The Lord be with you as we journey together in isolation through Holy Week to the wonderful festival of Easter.